In an attempt to destroy Hamas, Israel has launched a full-scale assault in Gaza that has resulted in the deaths of thousands of people. African nations are concentrating on the causes of the issue at hand in this divided world. The decades of crimes Israel committed while occupying land that formerly belonged to the Palestinian people are the reason Hamas infiltrated Israel's borders. Palestinians have lived as second- and third-class citizens without their own land since 1947. Nevertheless, nations are endorsing Israel and the attack in Gaza along with it, rather than addressing this fundamental problem. To put an end to the conflict, Israel and the international community must heed the words of South Africa's president, Cyril Ramaphosa. Regardless of the Western response to his statements, he denounced war crimes and attacks on people, regardless of the perpetrator's side. Then he offered a suggestion that has caused a stir both in Israel and the West. How did he put it? And in this struggle, whose nation does South Africa stand with? Let us be aware of it. In several speeches, media appearances, and public gatherings, the President of South Africa has expressed strong opinions over the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. Cyril Ramaphosa, the President of South Africa, expressed support for the Palestinian people. This is due to the fact that you must stand up for what is right against wrong, regardless of the nation or group you represent. The bombing of hospitals and the deaths of thousands of innocent bystanders in this instance cannot be seen as normal. He emphasized how important it is to carry out the two-state solution, which calls for the establishment of an independent state for the Palestinian people. In addition, Ramaphosa sent his sympathies to the families impacted by the most recent fighting in Israel and the Gaza Strip. He expressed worries that the situation would worsen in response to the Israeli order to move residents of northern Gaza to the southern regions. He emphasized that South Africa stands in solidarity with the Palestinian people and their efforts to find a peaceful end to the conflict, noting that the Middle East would benefit from such a resolution. Regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, President Ramaphosa called for a UN-led negotiation mechanism. He stressed that it is the duty of the international community to promote harmony and create an environment conducive to communication. These statements were made at the Cairo Summit for Peace, where topics of conversation included the critical need for humanitarian aid, as well as the worsening violence in Israel and the Gaza Strip. He emphasized the position taken by the South African government, which sees the attacks on Israeli citizens, the siege of Gaza, and the forcible evacuation of its people as breaches of international law. He demanded that hostilities end immediately, that hostages be freed, that the embargo of Gaza be lifted, that humanitarian corridors be established, and that aid be sent to Gaza. You should be aware that all supplies of food, water, electricity, and other basics to Gaza are currently shut off by Israeli soldiers. While millions of Gazan residents are in dire need of food and water, Israel remains unwavering in its refusal to lift the barrier. The President of South Africa made a point about how urgently this needs to be addressed internationally. President Ramaphosa emphasized the need of pursuing peace rather than retaliation by drawing comparisons between the Palestinian cause and South Africa's struggle against apartheid. He underscored that the Israeli-Palestinian problem can only be resolved by peace, and he urged all sides to use caution while pleading with states not to arm either side. He voiced worries that the way the Israeli government responded to attacks on its residents may escalate the war even more, making it more difficult to reach a fair and lasting peace. He promoted the realization of the justifiable goals of the Palestinian people, such as the realization of their human rights, dignity, and statehood, through United Nations resolutions endorsing statehood for Israel and Palestine on the basis of the 1967 boundaries. In order to promote peace, justice, and human rights for all, President Ramaphosa urged the international community to demand a ceasefire and strive for a long-term resolution to the conflict. The President of South Africa indicated his willingness to mediate the dispute between Israel and Palestine without waiting for all nations to agree on a solution. He emphasized in his statement that South Africa is prepared to work with the international community and share its knowledge of resolving conflicts, drawing on its experience both on the African continent and beyond. South Africa is a member of the BRICS, which also includes China and Russia, therefore this is possible. Additionally, both of these nations have supported a two-state resolution to the conflict. As a result, South Africa is better positioned to fulfill its role as a broker of peace and thwart Western and American efforts to escalate hostilities. The United States is sending its own troops, not helping to broker a peace. $105 billion in financial and military assistance to Israel. This demonstrates American objectives in this war. A comprehensive and sustainable peace process that would create a Palestinian state capable of peacefully coexisting with Israel was advocated by Ramaphosa. He argued that the internationally recognized lines of 1967 should serve as the foundation for this peace, with East Jerusalem acting as the capital of the state of Palestine. In addition, the president of South Africa sent his sympathies to all those who have lost their lives in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and called for the unconditional and prompt establishment of humanitarian corridors to allow those in need to receive vital aid. He underlined how urgent it is to put an end to the violence and lessen suffering for people in the area. The recent upsurge in Middle East tensions can be attributed to Hamas's launch of Operation Al-Aqsa against Israel. This was a reaction to Israeli settlers' acts and the storming of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in occupied East Jerusalem. The Israeli military launched Operation Swords of Iron in reaction, targeting Hamas in the Gaza Strip, which resulted in a major escalation of hostilities. People from many ethnicities and origins have gathered in South Africa to voice their opinions during protests on the Israel-Hamas conflict. While some demonstrators supported certain conflict stances, others denounced both sides for their airstrikes and civilian losses. Pro-Palestine demonstrations are taking place everywhere in the world. You must be aware that the South African government has denounced Israel's occupation, whilst the U.S. Hamas's acts have been described by President Joe Biden as a terrorist attack against Israel. This demonstrates how the globe is split on this issue and how a nation's position is the only thing that counts. However, what exactly is the two-state solution that the president of South Africa is discussing? A separate state of Palestine would be established alongside the state of Israel, west of the Jordan River, according to the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There is constant debate and argument over the exact border between these two states. Leaders of the Palestinian and Arab communities have repeatedly demanded that Israel withdraw completely from the areas it occupied in 1967. Israel has refused this demand. Israel would still control the area that was once part of the Mandate Palestine, which included West Jerusalem, but is not a part of the State of Palestine. The United Nations Partition Plan for Palestine was approved by the UN General Assembly in 1947. It called for the creation of distinct Jewish and Arab nations on the territory, with Jerusalem remaining under international supervision. This proposal, however, was never implemented. A United Nations resolution from 1974 demanded that Israel and Palestine exist as two states side by side within internationally recognized borders. The state of Palestine's borders would be determined by those that existed before to 1967. This concept was supported by a more current resolution passed in November 2013 with a majority of votes. Israel and the US, however, voted against it. Since the 1982 Arab Summit in Fez, the Palestinian leadership has endorsed the idea of a two-state solution. Even Hamas came around to the idea of a Palestinian state inside the 1967 boundaries in 2017. Israel, on the other hand, views Palestinian leaders' attempts to get a state of Palestine recognized internationally as an act of unilateralism at odds with the two-state solution that has been established. The two-state solution has been increasingly unpopular over time, as evidenced by polls that show a fall in support for it. Since the 1991 Madrid Conference, diplomatic attempts have been made to find a two-state solution. These attempts include the 1993 Oslo Accords, the unsuccessful 2000 Camp David summit, and the early 2001 Taba negotiations. The Arab Peace Initiative was put up by the Arab League in 2002, however it was not adopted. The most recent effort, the peace negotiations in 2013-14, failed as well. The two-state solution is presently viewed by some experts as unachievable, and there is fear that the result could be a one-state reality, akin to apartheid. Plans for division were first put forth in 1937 and 1947. The Arab community in Palestine rejected the 1947 plan, despite support from the Jewish leadership. Palestinians were displaced as a result of the 1949 Armistice Agreement and the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, which also impacted the geography. UN Resolution 242, which demanded that Israel leave seized lands following the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, gave rise to the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO. The UN recognized Palestinian rights in 1974, including the freedom to choose their own government and the ability to go back to their native homes. However, these were merely empty promises. June of 1976, resolutions passed by the Security Council supported a two-state solution based on the borders that existed before 1967. The United States vetoed these resolutions nevertheless. The United States maintained that the parties should discuss the borders directly, even if it was in favor of a two-state solution. The United Nations strongly supported the concept of a two-state solution, assembly since the middle of the 1970s. The 1988 Palestinian Declaration of Independence declared support for a two-state solution while also obliquely recognizing the State of Israel. References to the 1947 UN Partition Plan and UN resolutions passed since 1947 served as the foundation for this recognition. A charter outlining the Palestinian state based on the 1967 lines was introduced by Hamas later in 2017. This was a departure from their charter of 1988, which demanded the creation of a Palestinian state that included all of mandatory Palestine. Is the two-state solution workable, though? We would like to remind you to watch more videos on Black history, culture, and identity by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. Now let's go on. By 2010, there was far less territory and resources available for a future Palestinian state due to the West Bank settlement's continuous growth and the Israeli government's strong backing for them. This development raised questions about the feasibility of a two-state solution among left-wing Israelis and Palestinians alike. With 138 votes in favor, 9 against, and 46 abstentions, the UN General Assembly later decided to recognize Palestine as a non-member observer state on November 29, 2012. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared intentions to construct 3,000 additional residences in the E1 neighborhood, which is east of East Jerusalem, the day following this vote. This demonstrated Israel's intention to never provide the Palestinians their own state. The United States was among the nations that criticized this decision. Australia voiced fears that Israel's action may jeopardize the prospects of a two-state solution, while the Obama administration viewed it as unproductive. Given that the Palestinian National Authority did not have control over the Dead Sea or the Jordan River, it was thought that the projected E1 settlement may divide the lands that fell under its purview. Netanyahu stated in March 2015 that he did not support the creation of a Palestinian state while in office, but he was also against a one-state resolution to the problem. The only viable solution at this point, given the severity of the conflict, is a two-state one. Every nation understands that this is the only option, regardless of how unrealistic, unpopular with Israel, or impossible it may seem. Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, spoke to the media while donning the traditional Palestinian scarf. "We stand here pledging our solidarity with the people of Palestine," the speaker declared. "Since many nations and world leaders realize that the Palestinian people have lived under occupation for nearly 75 years, we are very worried about the horrors that are taking place in the Middle East. Similar to other countries that have experienced colonialism and occupation, like India, South Africa, has a long history of demonstrating sympathy for the Palestinian cause. Shortly after overthrowing its own apartheid government in 1990, the nation established diplomatic ties with Palestine. There are a number of reasons why South Africa supports Palestine. First of all, South Africa is especially sensitive to the struggles of Palestinians living under Israeli rule because of its long history of oppression and disempowerment. Prominent figures such as Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi have been vocal supporters of Palestinian rights. Moreover, South Africa still remembers the West's role in maintaining apartheid, and Israel has been seen as a state supported by the West. Because of its past, South Africa now supports Russia, which gave military instruction to people who opposed the apartheid government. South Africa supports Palestinians, even though not many other nations are denouncing Israel's war on Gaza because of their economic reliance. This is due to the African National Congress's close ties to anti-discrimination activities, which are the foundation of South Africa's unwavering support for Palestine. Prominent ANC leaders and opponents of apartheid have repeatedly compared the plight of Palestinians by Israel to the subjugation that black South Africans experienced under the white government. Moreover, South Africa's steadfastness stems from its opposition to a worldwide viewpoint that is dominated by the West's attitude on significant matters. This was made clear when South African Minister of International Relations and Cooperation Naledi Pandor questioned why Western powers did not denounce Israel in the same manner, while African countries felt pressure to unite against Russia after its invasion of Ukraine. Following its announcement the year before that Israel ought to be categorized as an apartheid state, South Africa had earlier reduced the status of its embassy in Israel to a liaison office. It appears like the only choice left is to resolve this quarrel that has lasted for decades. This is due to the fact that Israel's troops have murdered tens of thousands of Palestinians since 1947, further demonstrating that the only practical solution is to establish a separate state for the Palestinian people. In 2022, it was decided that Israel's ongoing practices of discrimination and oppression against Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territories, as well as within Israel itself, constituted an apartheid regime under international law. Apartheid was found to be a crime committed by Israeli officials. In the occupied Gaza Strip, Israeli forces seemed to be committing war crimes during a 3-day onslaught in August. This intensified the consequences of an Israeli siege that had been in place for 15 years, severely dividing Palestinian land and amounting to unlawful collective punishment. Additionally, Israel tightened its restrictions on Palestinians' freedom of association, arbitrarily restricted their freedom of movement, and implemented closures that amounted to collective punishment, particularly in the northern West Bank. According to Amnesty International, during Israeli military raids in the West Bank in 2022, there was a rise in the number of Palestinians who were wrongfully killed and gravely injured. Torture and other cruel treatment of Palestinians continued, while administrative detentions of the population peaked at 14 years. For the 201st time, Israeli forces destroyed the town of Al-Araqib in the Nakab. Furthermore, official recognition was still pending for 35 Palestinian Bedouin communities located in Israel, and the possibility of forcible eviction for their people. For thousands of asylum seekers, the authorities withheld processing of their cases and restricted their ability to work. A statute allowing the Interior Minister to strip citizenship from anyone found guilty of crimes deemed a betrayal of state loyalty was affirmed by the Israeli Supreme Court in July. This law has only been enforced to Palestinian nationals since it was passed in 2008. However, prior to the most recent war, these were the norms. Following an attack by Hamas on Israel, the Israeli government threatened to escalate the violence and carried out massacres in Gaza. According to Amnesty International, Israel's aerial bombings of Gaza have a terrible effect on the local population. You should be aware that Israel has illegally closed off Gaza for 16 years, making it the largest open-air jail in the world. Over 3,193 people have died in Gaza, as a result of thousands of airstrikes by Israeli forces since October 7th. The bulk of the victims were civilians, including over 1,500 children. More than 12,500 people have been hurt, and sadly, more than 1,000 bodies are still under the debris, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza. Furthermore, Israel committed a war crime when it attacked a hospital, killing hundreds of civilians. Images of shredded and torn children and newborns were displayed, showing a scene for which humanity bears responsibility. The Office of the Prosecutor at the International Criminal Court must move quickly to complete its continuing investigation into any evidence of war crimes, as well as other transgressions of international law committed by all parties. The horrific civilian suffering we are witnessing is likely to continue until justice is served and Israel's apartheid system against the Palestinians is dismantled. A people already experiencing a severe humanitarian crisis has endured unspeakable agony as a result of the ceaseless shelling of Gaza. Gaza's economy is in ruins, and its healthcare system is in danger of collapsing after 16 years of Israel's unlawful blockade. Hospitals are overburdened, unable to handle the volume of injured patients, and severely short on supplies of necessary drugs and equipment. Throughout these terrible times, entire families have perished. One tragic instance is the incident that took place on October 7th in the Al Zaytun district of Gaza City, where Israeli forces struck a 3-story residential building. The Aldos family was staying there for 3 generations, and 15 family members, 7 of them were children, were tragically killed in the attack. Ani and Ibtisam Aldous, their grandkids Auni, 12, and Ibtisam 17, Adel and Ilham Aldous, and all 5 of their offspring were among the dead. Just 18 months old was the youngest victim. Until nations come together and work toward putting an end to the conflict, there will be more massacres, war crimes, and abuses of human rights. Every second that goes by, atrocities are committed. The President of South Africa has so explicitly demanded that the crisis end, and supporting the search for a long-term resolution to this dispute. How do you feel? Should African nations take a neutral stance or choose a side in this conflict? Is it preferable to offer a resolution that can put an end to the conflict? Share your ideas with us about a resolution to the Israel-Hamas conflict.